You keep speaking the right words, and nothing answers. What if the silence isn't God ignoring you, but your heart rejecting what your mouth is trying to command? You were taught that prayer is spoken, pronounced, declared, repeated, yet something inside you never moved. The lips performed while the chest stayed tight, the mind replayed old scenes, and the future refused to bend. There's a hidden fracture here, a mouth that asks for light, and a heart still staging darkness. You feel it when affirmations sound hollow, when devotion feels like labor, when belief collapses the moment you stop talking. Because something deeper than language is listening, something older than words. Beneath every prayer, images are forming, silent, vivid, decisive, and they don't care what you say out loud. They care what you see, what you feel, what you secretly accept as true. If your inner altar is divided, speech becomes static. And the most unsettling question remains, what if the power you're begging for has been waiting on your heart this whole time? There is a quiet violence in realizing that you have been faithful with your words and unfaithful with your feelings. You didn't mean to be. You never chose betrayal consciously. It happened slowly, almost tenderly, through habit, through survival, through the long education of disappointment. You learned how to say the right things, how to pronounce hope with precision, how to repeat promises until they sounded like truth. But beneath the cadence of your voice, something else kept breathing. An old atmosphere, a familiar heaviness, a background expectation that whispered, "This never works." And no matter how loudly you prayed, that whisper never left. This is the hidden problem no one names because it hurts too much to touch. You are not failing because you lack faith. You are failing because your faith is split. One part of you speaks upward, another part of you listens backward. Your mouth reaches for tomorrow while your heart clings to yesterday's evidence. Your lips declare abundance while your chest rehearses loss. Your tongue says, "I trust," but your nervous system still braces for impact. And reality, silent, impartial, precise, does not obey the louder voice. It obeys the deeper one. This is why repetition never saved you. You were told that if you said it enough times, something would eventually break open. That persistence alone could bend the universe. That prayer was a numbers game, quantity over coherence. But something always resisted, not outside you, inside you. Because repetition without alignment doesn't persuade life, it irritates it. Each word you spoke collided with an image you never questioned. Each declaration met a feeling you never challenged. Each prayer rose upward while expectation sank downward, and the fracture widened. You felt it most clearly in the silence after prayer, that moment when the words ended, and the old weight rushed back in. That was the truth surfacing. The truth that your loyalty was never to the prayer itself, but to the emotional state you returned to afterward, the disappointment you knew by heart, the caution you trusted more than miracles, the sadness that felt safer than hope. You didn't want to sabotage yourself, but your system had already chosen what felt real, and reality follows what feels real, not what sounds correct. This is the betrayal no one prepares you for, that your greatest opposition is not doubt, it is familiarity. You stayed loyal to the emotional weather you grew up in, to the tone of life that shaped you, to the quiet agreement that nothing truly changes. So when you prayed, your body listened and quietly said no, not out of rebellion, out of conditioning, out of years of learning what to expect. And now something uncomfortable begins to surface. What if the universe has always answered you accurately, not according to your words, but according to your felt permission? What if every delay, every silence, every closed door wasn't punishment, but reflection? Because the heart does not negotiate. It does not respond to persuasion. It responds to conviction. And conviction is not spoken. It is felt. You can repeat a lie forever, and the heart will still reject it. You can whisper the truth once, and the heart will reorganize everything around it. This is why your prayers felt exhausting, why devotion felt like effort instead of relief, why belief collapsed the moment you stopped performing it. Because performance was never alignment, and somewhere deep inside you already knew this. You just didn't want to admit the next realization. that the emotional state you secretly return to after prayer has more authority over your life than the prayer itself. And if that is true, then the question becomes unbearable. What else has been listening all along, waiting patiently, while you kept speaking to the wrong place? There is a moment, rare, sharp, unforgettable, when the mask slips. It happens not during prayer, but after. When the room goes quiet, when the words fade, when you are left alone with what remains. And what remains is never neutral. It is a feeling, a posture, an expectation that settles back into place like a familiar coat. This is where the real allegiance is revealed. You may not remember the exact words you prayed last week, but you remember the feeling you returned to. That is the state your heart trusts. That is the state it protects. And the heart, unlike the mind, does not respond to instruction. It responds to safety. You kept asking for change while your inner world kept choosing what felt known, because the unknown, even when it is beautiful, can feel dangerous to a nervous system trained in loss. So your prayers asked for expansion, while your body whispered, "Stay small." Your declarations reached for joy, while your chest tightened around disappointment, not because you lacked desire, but because desire without emotional permission creates conflict. And conflict fractures signal. This is the unseen sabotage, not conscious resistance, not rebellion, but emotional inertia, the loyalty to old pain because it is predictable, the loyalty to struggle because it gives identity, the loyalty to scarcity because abundance feels unreal. You learned slowly, painfully, that expecting too much leads to heartbreak, so you learned how to hope carefully, quietly, with an escape plan. And then you wondered why prayer felt weak, why miracles sounded like stories for other people, why faith felt like pretending. Because pretending is exactly what happens when words run ahead of feeling. The heart never followed your mouth. It stayed behind, guarding you from disappointment, from humiliation, from the unbearable regret of believing again and being wrong. So it created a split, a public you that speaks belief, a private you that braces for impact, and reality, unmoved by performance, mirrored the private one. This is why nothing shifted. This is why silence answered you. Because silence is not absence, it is feedback, and the feedback has been consistent. The universe did not respond to what you wanted. It responded to what you were ready to feel. And readiness is emotional, not verbal. This is where the collapse begins. Not a collapse of hope, but of illusion. The illusion that you can bypass the heart, that you can command life while distrusting it, that you can receive what you are not internally aligned to host. Prayer was never ignored. It was filtered. Filtered through expectation, filtered through self-concept, filtered through the emotional state you kept returning to like a home base. And now a darker realization presses in. If the heart has been the true gatekeeper all along, then every unanswered prayer has been honest, accurate, precise. And that means the problem was never divine distance, but internal division. A divided altar cannot generate power. A split signal cannot instruct reality. And this is where the discomfort sharpens into something almost unbearable. If feeling has always been the language, and expectation has always been the command, then everything you were taught about prayer was incomplete. And something else, something ancient, invisible, relentless, has been governing outcomes from beneath your awareness. Something that does not respond to pleading, something that does not negotiate, something that mirrors without mercy. The question is no longer why prayer didn't work. The question is, what invisible law has been answering you this whole time, and what happens when you finally understand how it listens? There is a reason ancient texts speak in symbols instead of instructions. Because the mechanism was never meant to be memorized, it was meant to be felt. This is where the betrayal of old beliefs begins, not gently, not politely, but with a quiet violence that rearranges everything you thought you knew. You were taught that prayer travels upward, that words rise, are heard, evaluated, and then, if approved, answered. But nothing in nature works that way. Signals don't move because they are loud, they move because they are coherent. And the heart is not a speaker, it is a transmitter. This is the invisible law no one prepared you for. Reality does not respond to requests, it responds to states. The heart is not a listener waiting for instructions. It is an altar generating atmosphere. And whatever atmosphere you sustain, life reflects. This is why Psalm 19 speaks without speaking. The heavens declare the glory. Not with language, not with sound, but with order, with vibration, with silent precision. Day pours forth speech to day. Night reveals knowledge to night. Not through words, through being. This is the law hidden in plain sight. Prayer was never meant to convince something outside you. It was meant to establish something within you. Because the heart does not hear vocabulary, it broadcasts frequency. And frequency does not argue, it instructs. Every feeling you sustain is a command. Every inner image is a blueprint. Every expectation is a vote. This is why imagery always outruns language. You can say, "I believe," while picturing failure. You can speak abundance while feeling lack. You can declare healing while identifying as broken. And the heart, loyal to images, loyal to feeling, will transmit the image, not the word. This is the mirror law. Emotion instructs reality how to respond to you. Not because reality is cruel, but because it is precise. Words are optional. Feeling is mandatory. And this is where awe mixes with discomfort, because it means prayer was never powerless. It was always working, just not the way you thought. Every time you prayed while feeling unworthy, you instructed reality to agree. Every time you hoped while expecting disappointment, you confirmed the outcome. Every time you asked while bracing for no, you aligned with no. The heart does not respond to desire, it responds to identity. And identity is emotional. This is why silence is more powerful than speech. Because silence reveals what state remains when the mouth stops moving. That state is the signal. And signals do not lie. This is the unsettling beauty of the mechanism. Reality is not judging you, it is mirroring you. Without commentary, without explanation, without apology. And now the deepest realization presses in like a shadow. If the heart has always been the altar, and feeling has always been the language, then prayer was never about asking. It was about becoming. Becoming the state you wished to experience. Becoming the frequency you hoped would arrive. Becoming internally what you wanted externally. Not later, now. And this is where the ground shifts beneath your feet. Because becoming requires surrender. Not to words, but to feeling. And feeling, real feeling, cannot be faked. It cannot be forced. It cannot be shouted into existence. It must be allowed. And allowance terrifies the part of you that learned to survive by control. Because to feel differently is to let go of who you have been. And that feels like death. So the mechanism waits, silent, impartial, exact, waiting for coherence. Waiting for the moment when your heart stops resisting its own desire. Waiting for alignment. And now the question is no longer theoretical. It is intimate, it is personal, it is unavoidable. If feeling is the true prayer, then what would happen if you stopped speaking and dared to feel as if it were already done? This is where the revelation turns dangerous, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The heart has never been passive, it has never been neutral. It has been deciding, quietly, constantly, without asking your permission. Long before you learned how to pray with words, you were already praying with feeling. When you expected rejection before it happened, when you rehearsed failure to soften the blow, when you imagined loss so it wouldn't surprise you, those were prayers. Silent ones, unconscious ones, but precise, and life answered them faithfully. Not because you deserved struggle, but because you felt aligned with it. This is the part that feels like betrayal, because it means your suffering was not random. It was coherent, not chosen deliberately, but chosen emotionally. The heart does not chase what you want, it sustains what you accept. And acceptance is not intellectual, it is visceral. It lives in the body, in the breath, in the way your stomach tightens when you imagine success, in the way your shoulders drop when you imagine disappointment. That drop, that release, that familiarity, that is alignment. This is why sudden miracles feel disorienting. They disrupt the emotional equilibrium you've maintained for years. They threaten the identity built around endurance, patience, sacrifice. And so the heart resists, not because it hates joy, but because joy feels foreign. The invisible law is not moral. It does not reward goodness or punish weakness. It simply reflects the dominant emotional signal, like a mirror with no opinion. And here is the part almost no one tells you. The heart believes images more than facts. You can show it evidence. You can argue with logic. You can quote scripture. But if the inner picture remains unchanged, nothing follows, because imagery is the heart's native language. This is why dreams move you more than explanations, why memories hijack your nervous system instantly, why imagined futures can produce real tears. The heart cannot tell the difference between imagined and actual, only between felt and unfelt. And this is the hidden law Joseph Murphy pointed toward. Quietly, carefully, almost apologetically, that prayer works when the subconscious accepts the image, not the sentence, the scene, not the request, the state. The heart must see itself living in the answer. Not someday, not hypothetically, now. And that is where resistance rises, because seeing yourself whole threatens the story of being broken. Seeing yourself free threatens the identity built around struggle. Seeing yourself chosen threatens the armor of self-protection. So the heart hesitates. It says, "This is dangerous. This is unfamiliar. This is too much." And the signal fractures again. This is why effort never works, because effort implies distance, and distance is the opposite of coherence. You cannot effort your way into a state. You can only allow it. And allowance requires something terrifying, letting go of the old emotional home, the sadness you know how to navigate, the anxiety that feels like vigilance, the longing that keeps you reaching but never arriving. Those states have been loyal companions. They protected you, they shaped you, they gave you identity. So when the heart is asked to release them, it resists, not out of fear of failure, but fear of loss of the familiar self. And this is where the invisible law stands unmoved. It does not rush you. It does not pressure you. It simply continues reflecting what you sustain. Until one moment, quiet, unspectacular, almost invisible, when something inside you softens, not because you forced it, but because you are tired of carrying the old weight. And in that moment, the heart does something radical. It lets a new image linger, just for a breath, just long enough to feel it. And that single coherent feeling, unsupported by words, unannounced, unexplained, changes the signal. Not loudly, but definitively. And now the tension tightens again. Because if that is true, if feeling is the mechanism, if imagery is the command, then the next step is no longer about understanding. It is about participation. And participation means choice, not spoken, not declared, felt. The question hangs, heavy and alive. Are you willing to let your heart feel what it has never felt safe enough to hold, without asking, without explaining, without words? If this is stirring something inside you, not excitement, but recognition, then pause for a moment. Because recognition is not passive. It is the body remembering a truth before the mind can explain it. You didn't arrive here by accident. Something in you followed a signal, a quiet pull, a pressure behind the chest that said, "Listen." And if what you're hearing feels unsettling, if it feels like something inside you is being gently but relentlessly exposed, that is alignment beginning. This is not content. This is not information. This is an invitation, an energetic threshold. When you like this video, you are not clicking approval. You are signaling agreement. You are telling your own nervous system, "Yes, I recognize this." You are letting your body participate before your mind finishes questioning. When you comment, even a single word, you are not engaging an algorithm. You are externalizing an inner knowing. You are allowing a private realization to breathe. And when you subscribe, it is not about following a channel. It is a declaration. Our quiet internal sentence spoken without words. I am ready to listen differently. I am willing to feel before I ask. I am no longer pretending that words alone are enough. Belonging is not about numbers, it is about resonance, and resonance amplifies signal. If something in this space feels familiar, if it feels like a memory you can't quite place, then let yourself respond. Not because you should, but because something in you already has. This is not a call to action. It is a call to alignment, and alignment does not wait for certainty. It moves when recognition arrives, because the heart knows long before the mind catches up. And now, with that small, seemingly insignificant movement, the field shifts again, not dramatically, subtly, but enough to matter. Because the invisible law responds to participation, and participation has just begun. Bloco 05. Now comes the most difficult movement, not because it is complex, but because it is simple, so simple that the mind distrusts it. You have spent years trying to make prayer work, trying to perfect the words, trying to discipline the thoughts, trying to override the feeling. And all along, the shift required was not effort, but reversal. Feeling before asking. Not as imagination, not as fantasy, but as permission. This is where most people turn away. Because permission feels irresponsible to a system trained in vigilance. You were taught that you earn relief. That piece comes after proof that safety follows control. So to feel first, to feel without evidence, feels like stepping off a ledge without checking the ground. And yet, this is the hinge. The heart does not move toward what it hopes for. It moves toward what it accepts as present. So the method is not to request a future state, but to inhabit it internally, quietly, briefly, without announcement. You do not ask for peace. You let your breath soften as if peace were already here. You do not beg for abundance. You allow your chest to relax as if there were nothing to defend against. You do not plead for love. You let your body feel unguarded, just for a moment, as if love were no longer a question. This is not pretending. This is not lying to yourself. This is withdrawing resistance, and resistance is the only thing that ever blocked the signal. The heart does not need proof. It needs permission. Permission to feel differently now, even if just for a breath. Even if just for a second. Even if your mind protests. Because the mind will protest. It will say, this is dangerous. This is naive. This is too soon. Let it. The mind does not command the signal. The body does, and the body listens to feeling, not argument. So the shift begins here. You stop asking life to change, and you change the feeling that tells life who you are. Not forcefully, not heroically, but gently, like loosening a grip you didn't realize you were holding. The moment you feel relief without cause, the signal changes. The moment you feel wholeness without proof, the instruction updates. The moment you feel safe without explanation, the altar realigns. And something subtle but undeniable occurs. The inner noise quiets, not because everything is solved, but because something is settled. This is the beginning, not of manifestation, but of coherence. And coherence does not rush. It stabilizes, it deepens, it holds. But here is where tension sharpens again. Because the heart will test you. It will ask, can you stay here? Can you feel this without reaching for words? Can you allow this state without immediately questioning it? And this is where most people snap back. Back to asking, back to explaining, back to effort. Because stillness feels empty to a system addicted to striving. So the practice is not dramatic. It is almost invisible. You feel first, and you stop there. No prayer afterward, no words layered on top, no explanation added. You let the feeling stand alone. And in that silence, the heart begins to trust itself, which is the only trust that ever mattered. There is a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the old reflex rises. The urge to do something, to speak, to ask, to reinforce the feeling with words, just in case it fades. This is where the practice becomes surgical, because words, at this stage, are not helpers. They are interruptions. The heart has finally begun to feel something unfamiliar. Relief without reason, wholeness without permission, calm without context, and the mind panics. Because the mind equates explanation with safety, so it reaches for language. But language collapses the state. It pulls the feeling back into effort. So the shift asks for something counterintuitive. When the feeling appears, do nothing. Let it be fragile. Let it be temporary. Let it be unsupported. Because supported feelings become performances, and performance fractures signal. You are not trying to hold the state forever. You are simply letting it exist without interference. This is how the heart learns. I can feel this, and nothing bad happens. That sentence, felt, not spoken, rewires everything, because the heart's fear was never the feeling itself. It was the imagined consequence. So you let the feeling pass through without chasing it. You do not cling. You do not repeat. You do not analyze. You allow it to come and allow it to go. And slowly, without announcement, it begins to return on its own. Not because you asked, but because it was safe. This is the reversal of effort. The heart stops bracing, the signal stabilizes, and something unexpected occurs. The old emotional home, the heaviness, the vigilance, the sadness, begins to feel louder, more abrasive, less natural. Not because it disappeared, but because something else now exists for comparison. And that comparison is everything. You start to notice how often you return to old feelings out of habit, not truth. How often you tense out of loyalty, not necessity. How often you brace because you forgot you were allowed to relax. And now a choice emerges. Not a dramatic one, a subtle one. Do you return to the familiar state? Or do you pause long enough to let the new one breathe? This is where discipline replaces desire. Not rigid discipline, gentle discipline. The discipline of not interfering, of not sabotaging, of not talking yourself out of what your heart is learning to accept. And this is the hidden courage of the method, staying with the feeling long enough to let it reconfigure identity. Because feelings don't just pass through, they inform the self. They whisper, "This is who you are now." And the heart listens, not because you commanded it, but because it experienced it. This is how prayer becomes embodied, not through asking, not through repetition, but through allowance. And yet, the deepest tension remains, because allowance demands trust, and trust feels dangerous to a system built on survival. So the heart hesitates, it tests, it retreats, it returns. And each time it returns, it stays a fraction longer, until one day, without ceremony, the new state no longer feels new. It feels normal. And that is when the invisible law responds, not with fireworks, not with signs, but with subtle rearrangements, opportunities that feel unforced, conversations that open without effort, doors that do not resist. And the most unsettling realization arrives. Life did not change first. You did, and life followed. But this is not the end, because when the inner state shifts, identity must follow. And identity is the final threshold. There is a subtle grief that accompanies real change, not the grief of loss, but the grief of outgrowing. Because when the heart stabilizes in a new state, the old self becomes visible for the first time, and you realize how much of who you were was built around tension, around vigilance, around waiting for something to go wrong. That self had a job. It kept you alert. It kept you prepared. It kept you alive. So when the new state arrives, quiet, grounded, unannounced, the old identity feels threatened. It asks, if I am no longer needed, who am I? This is where identity rupture begins, not with empowerment, but with disorientation. You no longer feel compelled to explain yourself. You no longer feel the urge to justify hope. You no longer feel the need to speak belief out loud. Silence becomes comfortable. And that is unsettling, because silence used to mean emptiness. Now it means fullness. You notice that you stop pleading internally, stop rehearsing outcomes, stop negotiating with the future. You begin to expect without effort, not arrogantly, not loudly, calmly. And expectation, quiet expectation, is power. This is where you cross from seeker to knower, Not because you learned more, but because you stopped doubting the feeling. The knower does not announce certainty. They inhabit it. They do not convince. They rest. And rest is dangerous to systems built on struggle. People may not recognize you at first, because you no longer vibrate with urgency. You no longer signal need. You no longer broadcast hunger. You are not waiting to be chosen. You feel chosen, not by circumstance, by coherence. And that coherence reorganizes behavior. You stop chasing, stop forcing, stop proving. You listen more than you speak. You respond instead of react. You allow instead of demand. This is the silent authority Joseph Murphy hinted at but rarely named, the authority of inner alignment. When the heart and expectation agree, the mouth becomes optional. You don't pray for outcomes. You move from a state where outcomes make sense. And this is where fear tries one last time. It whispers, this will make you passive. This will make you careless. This will make you vulnerable. But the opposite happens. You become precise, because you are no longer distracted by inner contradiction. Your yes carries weight. Your no holds ground. Your presence stabilizes rooms, and you don't know how to explain it. You just know something fundamental shifted. But here is the fracture point. Identity does not update instantly. The old self will return, not as a tyrant, but as a habit, in moments of stress, in moments of delay, in moments when life does not immediately reflect the new state. And in those moments, a choice appears, not dramatic, quiet. Do you speak again, or do you feel? Do you plead, or do you return to the state? Do you abandon the knower, or do you stay? This is where identity is forged, not in ease, but in pause. Staying is the hardest part. Not staying in belief, but staying in feeling when nothing outside you rushes to confirm it. This is where identity either crystallizes or collapses back into habit. The old self returns softly, not accusing, not loud. It returns as a suggestion. Just in case, maybe you should pray again. Maybe say it one more time. Maybe you felt too much, too soon. This is not doubt, it is nostalgia. The nostalgia of effort, the comfort of doing something familiar. Because effort gave you a role. Effort made you feel responsible. Effort made you feel moral. Effort made you feel deserving. But the new identity has no script. It does not earn. It does not negotiate. It does not beg. It assumes. And assumption feels dangerously close to arrogance, until you realize it is simply alignment without apology. You are no longer trying to convince life. You are no longer pleading with the future. You are standing in an internal posture that says, this is who I am now. Without explanation. Without defense. And that posture changes how you move. You stop rushing conversations, stop oversharing your hopes, stop seeking validation for what you already feel. You let silence do the work words used to do, and silence does it better, because silence does not contradict itself. The heart settles into a new gravity, and gravity attracts without effort. You begin to notice that things meet you halfway, that opportunities feel timed, not chased. That resistance dissolves instead of intensifying. Not always, not perfectly, but enough to unsettle the old narrative, enough to make you question whether struggle was ever required. And this is where the deepest rupture occurs. You realize that your identity was never who you were. It was who you learned to be in response to pain. And now, without ceremony, that response is no longer automatic. You feel before you speak. You check the state before the sentence. You notice the image before the request. And sometimes you say nothing at all, because nothing needs to be said. The knower does not narrate. They embody. This is the silent reconfiguration, not dramatic, not visible to everyone, but irreversible. Because once the heart knows it can feel differently without consequences, it never fully returns to fear. Fear loses authority, and something else takes its place. A calm expectation that does not rush. A grounded presence that does not seek permission. An inner atmosphere that commands without sound. And yet, even now, even here, there is no finish line. Because identity is not a destination. It is a frequency you must return to, again and again, especially when life tests coherence. And life will test it. Delays will come. Silence will return. Old triggers will knock. Not to punish you, but to ask one final question. Will you speak again, or will you remain in the feeling that already knows? There is a sound beneath all sound, a hum that does not vibrate in the ears, but in the chest. You can hear it only when you stop trying to answer yourself. This is where everything slows, not because something is finished, but because something is listening. You are no longer speaking upward. You are no longer asking outward. The attention has turned inward, not in search but in awareness. And awareness changes the field. You begin to notice how the heart listens to itself, how it registers every subtle agreement, every quiet rejection, every moment you choose feeling over performance. This is where prayer dissolves into presence, not because prayer failed, but because it was never meant to stay verbal. Words were scaffolding, feeling was the structure, and now the scaffolding falls away. What remains is not certainty, it is resonance, a living echo that does not answer questions, but rearranges them. You may still feel the shadow, the old hesitation, the instinct to brace. They do not vanish. They soften. They lose dominance. They become signals instead of commands. And you let them pass without allegiance. You feel the pull to speak, and you pause. You feel the urge to ask, and you breathe. You feel the temptation to explain, and you let the silence stand. Because silence now feels different. It is not emptiness, it is pregnant. Something is forming, not outside you, but through you. And this is where the mystery deepens. You are no longer waiting for signs. You are becoming one. Your inner atmosphere is speaking on your behalf. Your expectation is instructing without words. Your heart is praying continuously, not through effort, but through being. And the most unsettling truth settles in quietly. Nothing dramatic may happen next. No lightning. No revelation shouted from the sky. Just life, responding differently, subtly, gradually, accurately, because the law has not changed, only your relationship to it. And now the question that remains is not something you answer tonight. It is something you live into. When the next moment of uncertainty arrives, when the old habit reaches for words, when silence stretches and offers no reassurance, what will you choose to feel? Not think, not say, feel. Because the heart is listening. It always has been. And whatever you feel next will be heard, not judged, not delayed, mirrored.